In the calm cabin of a commercial airplane, Mr. Carter's routine business trip takes a dramatic turn when his 7-year-old daughter, Aaliyah, is left in first class under the care of flight attendant Marie. What starts as a quiet journey soon unravels into a moment of injustice when Aaliyah faces harsh treatment from Marie, who lets her prejudice and frustration surface in cruel ways. As Aaliyah struggles in silence, her father, a humble but powerful man, checks on her throughout the flight, unaware of Marie's true behavior. But when Mr. Carter witnesses Marie slap his daughter, the calm turns to chaos. What Marie doesn't know is that Mr. Carter owns the very airline she works for, and her apology comes too late. Before we dive into this story of power, humility, and standing up for what's right, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional real-life stories. The bustling terminal of Atlanta International Airport hummed with its usual symphony of rolling luggage, hurried footsteps, and the constant drone of announcements echoing through the vast space. Through the sea of travelers, a striking pair caught the eye. A tall, distinguished black man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, holding hands with a bright-eyed 7-year-old girl whose pink backpack bounced with every skip. "Daddy, look, that's our plane." Aaliyah Carter pointed excitedly through the floor-to-ceiling windows at a gleaming white aircraft with blue trim. Her father, Marcus Carter, smiled warmly at his daughter's enthusiasm, though his mind was partially occupied with the upcoming business meeting that had forced this last-minute flight arrangement. "That's right, sweetheart," he said, giving her small hand a gentle squeeze. "That's one of ours." A group of business travelers walked past, doing double takes as they recognized the airline CEO. Marcus noticed, but maintained his focus on his daughter. He'd worked hard to keep Aaliyah's life as normal as possible, despite his position. Today was one of those rare occasions where he'd given in to her pleading to join him on a business trip, mainly because it coincided with her school break. "Remember what we talked about?" Marcus asked as they approached the priority boarding line. Aaliyah nodded solemnly, her dark curls bouncing. "Best behavior, inside voice, and no jumping on the seats even if they're super bouncy." Marcus chuckled, reaching down to adjust the collar of her yellow dress. "That's my girl. And what else?" "If I need anything, ask the flight attendant politely," she recited, beaming with pride at remembering all the rules. As they made their way down the jet bridge, Marcus felt a familiar pang of guilt. He'd have to leave her alone in first class while he attended to an urgent meeting with investors and economy. It wasn't ideal, but at least she'd be comfortable. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." The captain greeted him warmly at the aircraft door, extending his hand. "It's an honor to have you aboard today." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Captain Phillips. This is my daughter, Aaliyah." Aaliyah gave a small curtsy, making both men smile. "It's nice to meet you, Captain." "The pleasure's all mine, young lady," the captain replied, tipping his hat playfully. "I hope you enjoy your flight with us today." As they made their way to first class, a flight attendant with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a practiced smile approached them. Her name tag read Marie. "Welcome aboard," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "Can I help you find your seats?" Marcus gestured to 2A and 2B. "We're right here. Thank you." "Marie, I have a favor to ask. I need to attend to some business and economy during the flight, and I was hoping you could keep an eye on my daughter." Marie's smile widened, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, sir. We'll take excellent care of her." She turned to Aaliyah, her voice taking on a slightly condescending tone. "Aren't you lucky to be flying in first class today?" Aaliyah shifted closer to her father, picking up on something in Marie's tone that made her slightly uncomfortable. Marcus, distracted by an incoming text about his meeting, missed the subtle change in the atmosphere. "Thank you, Marie." "Aaliyah, sweetheart, let's get you settled." Marcus helped his daughter into her window seat, stowing her backpack underneath. He pulled out her favorite stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunks, and placed it in her lap. "Now remember, I'll be back to check on you as soon as I can. If you need anything at all, Marie will help you, okay?" He kissed the top of her head. "Okay, Daddy," Aaliyah said softly, already missing him even though he hadn't left yet. Marcus turned to Marie once more. "She might get a little nervous during takeoff. Could you make sure she has some water?" "Absolutely," Marie assured him with that same plastic smile. She'll be in good hands. As Marcus reluctantly made his way to economy, Marie's demeanor underwent a dramatic transformation. The moment he was out of sight, her smile vanished, replaced by a look of barely concealed contempt. "Stay in your seat and don't cause any trouble," she said curtly to Aaliyah, before turning on her heel and walking away. Aaliyah hugged Mr. Trunks closer, confused by the sudden change. She watched as other passengers boarded, Marie greeting each one with varying degrees of warmth, though none received the icy treatment she had just experienced. The plane filled quickly, and soon the safety demonstration began. Aaliyah tried to catch Marie's eye during the presentation, hoping to ask for the water her father had mentioned, but the flight attendant deliberately avoided looking in her direction. As the plane took off, Aaliyah's ears started to hurt. She remembered her father saying she should swallow to make it better, but she really needed some water. Gathering her courage, she pressed the call button. Marie appeared moments later, her face tight with annoyance. "What? May I please have some water?" Aaliyah asked politely, her voice small. Marie reached up and switched off the call button. "Service hasn't started yet. You'll have to wait." She walked away without another word, leaving Aaliyah fighting back tears. A few minutes later, Marie began serving drinks to other first-class passengers, completely skipping Aaliyah's row. When Aaliyah tried to speak up, Marie cut her off with a sharp look that made the words die in her throat. The businessman across the aisle noticed and frowned. "Excuse me," he called to Marie. "I think you missed this young lady." Marie's fake smile returned instantly. "Oh, I'll be taking care of her separately, as arranged with her father." The lie rolled smoothly off her tongue, and the businessman nodded, satisfied with the explanation. As the flight progressed, the cabin grew chilly. Aaliyah wrapped her arms around herself, wishing she had worn something warmer than her short-sleeved dress. Once again, she pressed the call button. Marie appeared, visibly irritated. "What now?" "I'm cold," Aaliyah whispered. "Could I please have a blanket?" Marie stalked off without responding. A moment later, she returned and practically threw a blanket at Aaliyah, not even bothering to remove it from its plastic wrapper. The package hit Aaliyah in the chest before falling to her lap. "Anything else?" Marie asked sarcastically. When Aaliyah shook her head, Marie leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Listen, little girl, I don't know who you think you are, but this isn't your private jet. Stop bothering me with every little thing." Aaliyah's lower lip trembled as she struggled with the plastic wrapper, her small fingers unable to find the opening. She could feel Marie watching her with disapproval, but the flight attendant made no move to help. "Spoiled little princess," Marie muttered under her breath as she walked away. Probably never heard the word no in her life. Aaliyah finally managed to open the blanket, wrapping it around herself and Mr. Trunks. She didn't understand why Marie was being so mean to her. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd used her manners just like her father had taught her, and she hadn't asked for anything unreasonable. The minutes crawled by like hours. Aaliyah watched the clouds outside her window, trying to distract herself from her growling stomach. She hadn't eaten breakfast properly that morning, too excited about the trip, and now it was well past lunchtime. When Marie began serving meals to the other passengers, the delicious smell of warm food filled the cabin. Aaliyah's stomach growled loudly, causing Marie to shoot her another disapproving look. "Excuse me," Aaliyah said timidly when Marie passed by with a tray. "May I please have something to eat?" Marie's eyes narrowed. "Your father didn't pre-order a children's meal for you. We don't have any extra meals available." This was another lie. There were always extra meals in first class, and Marcus had specifically ordered a meal for his daughter. But Aaliyah had no way of knowing this, so she simply nodded and turned back to the window, trying to ignore the sounds of other passengers enjoying their lunch. A kind-looking elderly woman in the row behind Aaliyah noticed what was happening. She cleared her throat to get Marie's attention. "I'm not very hungry today. Perhaps this young lady could have my meal." Marie's face flushed with anger, but she maintained her professional facade. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're not allowed to transfer meals between passengers. It's against company policy." Another lie. The elderly woman frowned, but didn't push the issue, shooting Aaliyah a sympathetic look. Aaliyah pretended to be absorbed in watching the clouds, not wanting anyone to see the tears welling up in her eyes. As the afternoon wore on, Aaliyah became increasingly uncomfortable. She needed to use the bathroom, but was afraid to press the call button again. Finally, unable to wait any longer, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Marie materialized almost instantly. "Where do you think you're going?" "I need to use the bathroom," Aaliyah explained quietly. Marie pointed to the seatbelt sign, which was off. "Well, next time wait for me to escort you. We can't have children running around the cabin unsupervised." She grabbed Aaliyah's arm roughly, marching her to the bathroom at the front of first class. "Make it quick," Marie snapped, releasing Aaliyah's arm with enough force to make her stumble slightly. Inside the tiny bathroom, Aaliyah rubbed her arm where Marie had grabbed her, watching a red mark slowly fade from her skin. She wished her father would come check on her soon, but she didn't want to tell him what was happening. He was busy with important work, and she didn't want to be a bother. When Aaliyah emerged from the bathroom, Marie was waiting with her arms crossed. "Took you long enough," she said, practically pushing Aaliyah back to her seat. "Stay there and don't move again without permission." Aaliyah sank into her seat, pulling Mr. Trunks close and burying her face in his soft fur. She tried to remember the excitement she'd felt that morning when her father had agreed to let her come on this trip. Now she just wished she were home. In economy class, Marcus was busy with his meeting, completely unaware of his daughter's distress. He checked his watch, realizing more time had passed than he'd intended. He needed to check on Aaliyah soon. Meanwhile, Marie continued her subtle campaign of mistreatment, growing bolder with each passing hour. When Aaliyah accidentally knocked over an empty plastic cup, Marie made a show of cleaning it up, muttering loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. This is what happens when parents don't teach their children proper manners. Aaliyah sat perfectly still, trying to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. She'd never experienced anything like this before. Her father had always taught her that everyone deserved respect, regardless of their position or background. He led his company the same way, treating every employee from janitors to executives with equal dignity. But Marie seemed to see something different when she looked at Aaliyah, something that made her angry. Was it because she was young? Because she was in first class? Or was it something else? Something Aaliyah was too young to fully understand, but old enough to sense? As the afternoon light slanted through the airplane windows, casting long shadows across the cabin, Aaliyah held on to one comforting thought. Her father would return soon. But for now, Aaliyah sat quietly in her first-class seat, a small girl dealing with her first real encounter with prejudice, holding her stuffed elephant close and trying to be brave, just like her daddy had taught her to be. Marcus Carter glanced at his watch as he wrapped up the preliminary discussions with his investors in economy class. It had been over 2 hours since he'd left Aaliyah in first class, and a nagging feeling of parental concern tugged at his conscience. The meeting could wait a few minutes while he checked on his daughter. As he made his way forward through the cabin, he nodded politely to passengers who recognized him. The familiar pride he felt in his airline was tempered today by worry about leaving Aaliyah alone for so long. It was her first time flying without him by her side the entire time. Entering first class, Marcus immediately spotted his daughter's dark curls against the window. She wasn't bouncing in her seat or looking out the window with her usual excitement. Instead, she sat perfectly still, clutching Mr. Trunks to her chest and staring straight ahead. "Hey, princess," Marcus said softly, crouching down beside her seat. "How are you doing?" Aaliyah turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm okay, Daddy. Just a little tired." Marcus noticed her untouched tray table and empty cup holder. "Have you had anything to eat or drink, sweetheart?" Before Aaliyah could answer, Marie materialized beside them, her demeanor completely transformed from earlier. Her smile was bright and attentive as she addressed Marcus. "Sir, I was just about to bring Aaliyah a fresh snack. She's been such a delightful passenger." Marie's voice dripped with artificial sweetness. "Can I get either of you anything?" Marcus glanced at his daughter, noting how she seemed to shrink slightly in her seat when Marie appeared. "Aaliyah, are you hungry?" Aaliyah's eyes darted briefly to Marie before she shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm fine." "Are you sure, sweetie?" Marcus pressed, feeling that something was off. You didn't eat much breakfast this morning. Really, I'm okay, Aaliyah insisted quietly, hugging Mr. Trunks tighter. Marie jumped in smoothly. She had a lovely lunch earlier, sir. I made sure she was well taken care of, just as you asked. The lie came easily to her lips, accompanied by a reassuring smile. Marcus frowned slightly, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. He'd raised Aaliyah to be honest, and she'd never had trouble telling him what she wanted before. This unusual quietness was concerning. How about some juice? He suggested, watching his daughter carefully. Before Aaliyah could respond, Marie interjected. I'll bring her fresh apple juice right away, sir. It's her favorite, she told me earlier. Another lie, as Aaliyah hadn't been able to tell Marie anything about her preferences. Marcus placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. Is everything really okay, princess? You seem a little down. Aaliyah forced another smile. I'm just tired, Daddy. Really? Don't worry about me. Your daughter is an absolute angel, Marie gushed, laying it on thick. So well-behaved and polite. You must be very proud. Marcus nodded slowly, still troubled by something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Yes, I am. He checked his watch reluctantly. I need to get back to my meeting, but I'll come check on you again soon, okay? Okay, Daddy, Aaliyah said softly. I love you. I love you too, princess. Marcus stood up, addressing Marie one more time. Please make sure she gets that juice, and maybe a small snack. Of course, sir. It's my pleasure to look after her. Marie's smile remained fixed in place until Marcus disappeared behind the curtain separating first class from economy. The moment he was gone, her expression changed dramatically. She leaned down close to Aaliyah, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with venom. Listen here, you spoiled little brat. If you say one word to your father about anything, you'll be very, very sorry. Do you understand me? Aaliyah nodded quickly, tears welling up in her eyes. Stop that sniveling, Marie snapped. I'll bring you your juice, but you better not make a mess or cause any more trouble. She stormed off to the galley, returning moments later with a large glass of apple juice. She practically slammed it down on Aaliyah's tray table, causing some to slosh over the sides. Clean that up, she ordered, throwing a napkin at Aaliyah before walking away to attend to other passengers with her practiced smile firmly back in place. Aaliyah's small hands shook as she tried to mop up the spilled juice. The glass was very full and heavy, and she struggled to lift it without spilling more. As she attempted to take a sip, the turbulence hit. The plane lurched slightly, and the glass slipped from Aaliyah's grasp. Apple juice cascaded across her tray table and onto her yellow dress before the glass clattered to the floor, fortunately not breaking, but sending juice everywhere. Marie's head snapped around at the sound. Her face contorted with rage as she stormed back to Aaliyah's seat. Other passengers were distracted by their own drinks and devices, giving Marie the opportunity she'd been waiting for. You clumsy, worthless little girl, she hissed, grabbing Aaliyah's arm roughly. I knew you'd make a mess. You're nothing but trouble. I'm sorry, Aaliyah whimpered. It was an accident. The plane. Marie's grip tightened painfully. Don't make excuses. Look at this mess. In her anger, she yanked Aaliyah's arm hard and struck her shoulder, disguising the movement as she pretended to reach across for napkins. Aaliyah let out a small cry of pain, quickly stifling it with her free hand. Tears streamed down her face as Marie continued to grip her arm tightly. Stop crying right now, Marie ordered through clenched teeth, or I'll give you something to really cry about. Clean this up immediately. She finally released Aaliyah's arm, leaving angry red marks where her fingers had dug in. Aaliyah's shoulder throbbed where Marie had hit her, but she tried to focus on cleaning up the spilled juice through her tears. Useless, Marie muttered as she watched Aaliyah struggling with the napkins. Just like I thought. You people think you can buy class, but you can't. You don't belong up here. Aaliyah didn't understand exactly what Marie meant, but the hatred in her voice was unmistakable. She worked as quickly as she could to clean up the mess, her small hands trembling as she gathered the soaked napkins. Marie snatched the wet napkins from her with a look of disgust. Look at your dress. What a disaster. I suppose you expect me to clean that too? No, ma'am, Aaliyah whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. You're sorry? Sorry doesn't clean up this mess, does it? Marie leaned in close again, her voice dripping with contempt. I don't know what your father did to afford first class, but clearly he forgot to teach you how to behave in it. The elderly woman from earlier had dozed off, and the businessman across the aisle was engrossed in his laptop with noise-canceling headphones on. No one noticed Marie's cruel treatment or Aaliyah's distress. Aaliyah hugged Mr. Trunks tightly, trying to draw comfort from her stuffed elephant. Her arm and shoulders still hurt, and her beautiful yellow dress was stained with juice. But worse than the physical pain was the emotional hurt of being treated with such cruelty when she'd done nothing to deserve it. She wanted desperately to tell her father what was happening, but Marie's threat echoed in her mind. Besides, she didn't want to disturb his important meeting. He was always teaching her about responsibility and handling things on her own when possible. But he'd never prepared her for something like this. The next hour passed in tense silence. Marie made sure to parade past Aaliyah's seat frequently, shooting her warning glares to remind her to stay quiet. Each time she passed, Aaliyah tensed up, afraid of what the flight attendant might do next. Her shoulder developed a dull ache where Marie had struck her, and she could feel bruises forming on her arm. She tried to pull her cardigan around herself more tightly, not wanting anyone to see the marks. The juice stain on her dress had dried into an ugly brown patch, making her feel even more ashamed. The businessman across the aisle finally removed his headphones and noticed Aaliyah's distress. "Are you all right, young lady?" he asked kindly. "You look upset." Before Aaliyah could respond, Marie appeared as if by magic. "Oh, she's just a bit airsick," she said smoothly. "I've been keeping a close eye on her. Don't worry." The businessman nodded sympathetically and returned to his work. Marie gave Aaliyah another warning look before moving away, but she stayed closer now, watching like a hawk to ensure Aaliyah didn't communicate with any other passengers. Aaliyah's stomach growled loudly. She still hadn't eaten anything. She was thirsty too, but she didn't dare ask for another drink after what had happened with the juice. Instead, she tried to make herself as small and invisible as possible, wishing she could disappear into her seat. She thought about her father's upcoming check-in. Would she be brave enough to tell him what was happening? Should she show him the bruises forming on her arm? But Marie's threats scared her, and she didn't know what the flight attendant might do if she told. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, but Aaliyah took no joy in watching the clouds anymore. Each minute felt like an hour as she waited for her father's return, both longing for and dreading it. She didn't want to lie to him again, but she was terrified of Marie's reaction if she told the truth. A baby started crying in the back of first class, and Marie's face twisted with annoyance. She walked back to deal with the situation, but not before giving Aaliyah one final threatening look. The message was clear: stay quiet or else. Aaliyah slumped in her seat, exhausted from fear and hunger. She closed her eyes, pretending she was anywhere else but here. Maybe if she tried hard enough, she could imagine herself back home, safe in her own room, where flight attendants couldn't hurt her and she didn't have to be afraid. But the throbbing in her shoulder and the emptiness in her stomach made it impossible to pretend. This was real, and she was trapped here with someone who seemed to hate her, someone who had hurt her and threatened to do worse. She hugged Mr. Trunks closer, burying her face in his soft fur to hide her tears. "Please come back soon, Daddy," she whispered, so quietly that no one could hear. "Please help me." Little did Aaliyah know that her father's next visit would change everything. But for now, she sat alone in her first-class seat, a small girl carrying the heavy burden of adult cruelty, waiting for someone to notice, someone to help, someone to make it stop. The plane continued its journey through the afternoon sky, carrying its passengers toward their destination. But for one little girl in first class, the real journey was learning a harsh lesson about human nature and waiting for justice that would soon arrive in a way no one, especially Marie, could have anticipated. Marcus Carter couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his stomach after his last visit with Aaliyah. Throughout the remainder of his meeting, his mind kept wandering back to his daughter's unusual behavior. The normally vivacious 7-year-old had seemed withdrawn, almost afraid. His paternal instincts were screaming that something was wrong. "I'm sorry, gentlemen," he said, interrupting an investor's lengthy presentation. "I need to take a brief break to check on my daughter." Please continue without me for a few minutes. Marcus made his way through economy class, his stride purposeful. Approaching first class, he slowed his pace, wanting to observe without being noticed. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. Aaliyah was hunched in her seat, clearly trying to make herself as small as possible. Her yellow dress was stained, and she was holding her arm at an odd angle. Even from a distance, he could see tear tracks on her cheeks. But before he could reach her, something happened that would forever change the course of this flight. Aaliyah, unaware of her father's presence, had reached for the seat control panel, trying to adjust her position to ease the pain in her shoulder. Marie, who had been watching her like a hawk, swooped in immediately. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion before Marcus's eyes. Marie grabbed Aaliyah's wrist roughly, yanking her hand away from the controls. "What did I tell you about touching things?" she snarled, and before anyone could react, she slapped Aaliyah hard across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the quiet cabin. Marcus Carter felt something snap inside him. In all his years of building his airline empire, through all the challenges and obstacles he'd faced as a black man in corporate America, he had never felt rage like this. "Get your hands off my daughter!" His voice thundered through the cabin, causing several passengers to jump in their seats. Marie froze, her hands still raised, as Marcus crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was deadly quiet now, controlled but vibrating with fury. "How dare you put your hands on my child?" Marie, still unaware of exactly who she was dealing with, straightened up and attempted to assert her authority. "Sir, your daughter has been disruptive throughout this flight. She's been touching equipment, making messes, and disturbing other passengers. You were simply assaulting a 7-year-old child." Marcus cut her off, his dark eyes blazing. "A child who was left in your care." "My child?" Other passengers were turning in their seats now, witnessing the confrontation. The elderly woman who had tried to help earlier was fully awake, her hand covering her mouth in horror. "Mr. Carter?" The captain's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from the cockpit, having heard the commotion. "Is everything all right, sir?" Marie's face went from defensive to confused. She looked between the captain and Marcus, the pieces slowly falling into place. "Mr. Carter?" she repeated weakly. "Yes, Marie," Marcus said, his voice arctic. "Mr. Carter, the CEO of this airline, the owner of this entire company, and more importantly, the father of the little girl you've been abusing." All the color drained from Marie's face as the full impact of her actions, and their consequences, hit her. I didn't know," she stammered. "You didn't know?" Marcus's voice rose slightly. "You didn't know what? That I'm the owner? That she was my daughter? And that makes it okay? Would it have been acceptable to treat any child this way?" The captain quickly assessed the situation, his face hardening as he took in Aaliyah's condition. "Marie, step away from Mr. Carter and his daughter immediately." Marie backed away, her legs shaking. "Sir, I can explain. There's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Marcus turned to his daughter, who was still curled up in her seat, trembling. "Aaliyah, sweetheart, come here." Aaliyah practically flew into her father's arms, bursting into tears as he lifted her. Marcus's heart broke as he felt her small body shaking with sobs. "Show me your arm, princess," he said gently. Aaliyah slowly pulled up her cardigan sleeve, revealing angry red marks and developing bruises. The captain inhaled sharply at the sight. "Mr. Carter, sir," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I assure you this behavior is completely unacceptable and goes against everything we stand for. Marie, surrender your credentials immediately. You are suspended, effective this moment." Marie, who had been desperately trying to find words to defend herself, now began to panic. "Please, you don't understand." She was being difficult. She made messes. She wouldn't listen. She's 7 years old. Marcus's voice boomed again, causing Marie to flinch. "She's a child who was left in your care, trusting you to keep her safe. Instead, you've terrorized her, struck her, and God knows what else you've done that she hasn't told me yet." The businessman across the aisle stood up, addressing the captain. "Sir, I witnessed the flight attendant skipping her drinks earlier. I regret believing her lies and not speaking up sooner. The elderly woman behind them also spoke up. She denied the poor dear food. I tried to give her my meal, but this woman wouldn't allow it. More passengers began sharing their observations, painting a horrifying picture of Marie's behavior throughout the flight. With each new revelation, Marie seemed to shrink smaller and smaller. "Captain Phillips," Marcus said, his voice returning to its usual measured tone, though I still edged each word. "I want this incident documented in detail. Every passenger who witnessed any part of this will be interviewed. I want statements from everyone." "Of course, sir," the captain nodded. "I've already notified ground authorities. They'll be waiting when we land." Marie's face went from white to gray. "Ground authorities? But you can't. My career." "Your career?" Marcus turned to her, his expression thunderous. "You're worried about your career after what you've done? Let me be very clear, Marie. You will never work in the airline industry again. Not just my airline, any airline. I will personally make sure of that." The captain stepped forward, positioning himself between Marie and the Carters. "Marie, you will remain in the gallery for the duration of this flight. Another flight attendant will be called up from economy to cover your duties. When we land, you will be escorted off the aircraft by security." Aaliyah, still in her father's arms, had calmed somewhat but kept her face buried in his shoulder. Marcus could feel wet spots on his suit where her tears had soaked through. "Daddy," she whispered so quietly only he could hear. "Yes, princess? I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." She said she'd hurt me worse if I did. Marcus felt his heart shatter and reform into something harder, colder. He turned back to Marie, who was still standing there, trembling. "You threatened my daughter? To keep her quiet about your abuse?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the now silent cabin with chilling clarity. Marie opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The captain quickly took her arm. "That's enough. To the gallery. Now." As Marie was led away, Marcus sat down in Aaliyah's seat, keeping his daughter in his lap. She was clutching Mr. Trunks with one hand and holding onto her father's suit jacket with the other, as if afraid he might disappear again. "Mr. Carter," the captain said softly, "is there anything else you need? We can make an emergency landing if you'd like." Marcus looked down at his daughter, considering the option. But they were more than halfway to their destination, and an emergency landing would only prolong the ordeal. "No, Captain Phillips. Let's continue to our destination. But I want the air marshal to stay in first class for the remainder of the flight, and I want Marie kept as far from my daughter as possible." "Of course, sir. I'll have another flight attendant bring up fresh clothes for Aaliyah from our emergency supply, and anything else she needs." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Marcus turned his full attention to his daughter. "Aaliyah, sweetheart, I am so sorry. I should have noticed sooner. I should have protected you better." Aaliyah looked up at her father, her young face showing wisdom beyond her years. "It's not your fault, Daddy. You didn't know she was a bad person. You always tell me to try to see the good in people first." Marcus hugged her closer, careful of her injured arm. "Yes, but I also tell you to speak up when someone is hurting you. Promise me you'll always tell me if someone treats you this way, no matter what they threaten." "I promise," Aaliyah whispered. "Can we go home after we land?" "Of course, princess. We'll take the first flight back." He kissed the top of her head. "And Aaliyah, I'm very proud of how brave you've been." The other first-class passengers had been watching the scene unfold, many with tears in their eyes. The elderly woman reached across the aisle to pat Aaliyah's hand gently. "You are a very strong young lady," she said softly. "And you have a wonderful father." Marcus nodded gratefully to the woman, then looked toward the gallery where Marie was being guarded by the air marshal. His expression hardened again as he thought about what would happen once they landed. This incident would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Marie but for his entire airline. He would use this as a catalyst for change, better training, stricter screening, zero tolerance for any form of discrimination or abuse. His daughter's suffering would not be in vain. He would make sure of that. But for now, he simply held his little girl, letting her know through his embrace that she was safe, she was loved, and nothing like this would ever happen to her again. The plane continued its journey through the afternoon sky, but the atmosphere in first class had transformed completely. Where there had been tension and fear, There was now protection and justice. Where there had been silence in the face of cruelty, there were now voices raised in support of what was right. And in Seat 2A, a father and daughter sat together, their bond stronger than ever, proving that love and justice would always triumph over hatred and prejudice, even at 35,000 feet. As the flight continued its descent toward the Atlanta airport, the tension in first class had given way to a solemn atmosphere. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation between Marcus Carter and the disgraced flight attendant, Marie, remained quiet, processing the gravity of what had unfolded before their eyes. Aaliyah had finally stopped trembling, taking comfort in the safety of her father's embrace. Marcus held her close, gently running his fingers through her hair as he murmured words of reassurance. The red marks on her arm had faded to angry pink lines, a physical reminder of the trauma she had endured. The air marshal stood guard near the galley, keeping a watchful eye on Marie, who sat hunched in a jump seat, her face ashen. The once confident flight attendant now resembled a cornered animal, fully aware that her actions had irreversibly altered the course of her career and her life. As the plane reached its gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom, instructing all passengers to remain seated until further notice. Marcus tightened his hold on Aaliyah, bracing himself for what was to come. A few minutes later, the cabin door opened, and a contingent of airport security personnel stepped aboard, accompanied by 2 plainclothes officers. The passengers observed in silence as the officers approached Marie, who visibly shrank back. "Marie Delacroix?" one of the officers asked, his voice stern. "Why, yes," she stammered, her eyes darting around desperately. "You're under arrest for assault of a minor. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." A collective gasp went through the cabin as the officers handcuffed Marie and led her off the plane. Aaliyah buried her face in her father's shoulder, unwilling to witness the spectacle. Marcus rubbed her back soothingly, his own heart heavy with a mixture of relief and righteous fury. Once the commotion had subsided, the captain returned to first class, his expression grave. He approached Marcus, who had shifted Aaliyah to the window seat to allow him to stand. "Mr. Carter, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am that this happened under my watch," the captain said, his voice thick with remorse. "I assure you, we will be conducting a full investigation, and I will personally see to it that this flight attendant never works for any airline again." Marcus nodded, his jaw set. "Thank you, Captain Phillips. I appreciate your swift action, but I'm afraid this goes far beyond one individual's behavior. There are systemic issues that need to be addressed." The captain inclined his head. "You're absolutely right, sir. This is a wake-up call for our industry. We will be re-evaluating our hiring practices, training protocols, and policies regarding passenger safety and dignity. I can assure you that changes will be made to prevent anything like this from ever happening again." "See that they are," Marcus said, his tone brooking no argument. "I will be following up personally to ensure that meaningful reform takes place." "You'll have it, sir," the captain promised. "In the meantime, is there anything else I can do for you and Aaliyah?" Marcus glanced at his daughter, who was staring out the window, her small frame still trembling slightly. "Yes, actually, I'd like to have our VIP car service waiting for us at the gate." "Of course, right away." The captain hesitated for a moment. With a final nod, the captain retreated, leaving Marcus to return to his seat beside Aaliyah. He gently brushed a stray curl from her face, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and sorrow. "How are you holding up, princess?" he asked softly. Aaliyah turned to him, her dark eyes shining with a maturity beyond her years. "I'm okay, Daddy. I just want to go home." Marcus pulled her into another hug, mindful of her injured arm. "We'll be home soon, I promise. And I want you to know that you were incredibly brave today. I'm so proud of you." Aaliyah snuggled closer, her small fingers clutching the fabric of his suit jacket. "I was scared, Daddy. I didn't want to tell you because she said she'd hurt me more if I did." "I know, sweetheart." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "But you did the right thing in the end. You're safe now, and that woman will never hurt you or anyone else again." A few moments later, a female flight attendant approached them, holding a neatly folded bundle of clothing. "Mr. Carter, I brought a fresh outfit for Aaliyah," as well as some toiletries. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do. Marcus accepted the items gratefully. Thank you. And please pass along my appreciation to the captain for his handling of this situation. The flight attendant nodded, casting a sympathetic glance toward Aaliyah before returning to her duties. Marcus turned to his daughter, gently guiding her toward the lavatory. Come on, princess. Let's get you cleaned up and into some fresh clothes. Then we can get off this plane and go home. Inside the lavatory, Aaliyah carefully changed out of her stained dress, wincing as she pulled the fabric over her tender shoulder. Marcus helped her with the buttons and zippers, his heart clenching at the sight of the bruises blossoming on her arm. I'm so sorry you had to go through this, sweetheart, he said, his voice tinged with regret. I should have been there to protect you. Aaliyah looked up at him, her expression earnest. It's not your fault, Daddy. You were working, and you didn't know what was happening. I'm just glad you came back and made it stop. Marcus pulled her into another hug, marveling at the resilience of his young daughter. You're right, princess, but I promise you, nothing like this will ever happen again. I'm going to make sure of that. When they emerged from the lavatory, the captain was waiting for them. Mr. Carter, the authorities are ready to speak with you and Aaliyah. Whenever you're ready, I'll escort you to the terminal. Marcus nodded, taking Aaliyah's hand and following the captain off the plane. As they stepped into the jet bridge, Aaliyah paused, looking up at her father with a thoughtful expression. Daddy, are you going to fire Marie? Marcus squeezed her hand reassuringly. No, sweetheart, I'm not going to fire her. She's going to face much more severe consequences than that. Aaliyah furrowed her brow. What do you mean? Well, she assaulted you, which is a crime, Marcus explained. The authorities are going to investigate, and she'll likely be arrested and charged. And I'll make sure she never works in the airline industry again. Aaliyah's eyes widened. She's going to jail? I'm afraid so, princess. Her actions were completely unacceptable, and she needs to be held accountable. Aaliyah was silent for a moment, processing this information. I don't want her to hurt anyone else, she said finally. Marcus felt a surge of pride at his daughter's mature response. Me neither, sweetheart. You've been through so much today, but I promise you, justice will be served. As they entered the terminal, they were greeted by a contingent of airport security and law enforcement officers. Marcus recognized the Atlanta police chief, who stepped forward to greet them. Mr. Carter, I'm Chief Daniels. We've been briefed on the situation, and we're ready to take your statements whenever you're ready. Marcus shook the chief's hand firmly. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate your prompt response. This is my daughter, Aaliyah. Aaliyah gave the chief a small, hesitant smile. Chief Daniels crouched down to her level, his expression kind. Hello, Aaliyah. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. But I want you to know that you're safe now, and we're going to make sure that mean lady never hurts anyone else. Aaliyah nodded, her grip tightening on her father's hand. Chief Daniels stood back up, addressing Marcus. We'd like to get your statements as soon as possible, if that's all right. We have a private room set up for you and Aaliyah. Of course, Marcus replied. Lead the way. As they followed the chief, Marcus noticed a group of reporters gathered near the security checkpoint, their cameras trained on the entrance. He sighed inwardly, knowing that this incident was likely to make headlines. But he was determined to protect Aaliyah from a media circus as much as possible. In the private room, Chief Daniels and two other officers took Marcus and Aaliyah's statements, meticulously documenting every detail of the flight attendant's abusive behavior. Aaliyah, with her father's encouragement, recounted the events bravely, her voice only wavering slightly when she described the physical altercation. When they were finished, Chief Daniels assured them that the investigation would be thorough and that Marie would face the full consequences of her actions. We'll be pressing charges for assault of a minor, as well as any other applicable charges that arise during the investigation, the chief said grimly. And we'll be working closely with the FAA and the airline to ensure this never happens again. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. I appreciate that, Chief. I want to make it clear that I will be pursuing this matter to the fullest extent of the law. This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable, and it needs to be addressed at a systemic level. Understood, sir, Chief Daniels replied. We'll keep you informed of the progress. and I can assure you that we'll do everything in our power to hold the responsible parties accountable." As the officers left the room, Marcus turned to Aaliyah, who had grown quiet. "How are you feeling, princess?" Aaliyah met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "I'm okay, Daddy." Marcus smiled softly, pulling her into a gentle hug. As they exited the terminal, Marcus couldn't help but notice the small crowd of reporters that had gathered, their cameras and microphones at the ready. He instinctively positioned himself to shield Aaliyah from their prying eyes, his expression hardening. "Mr. Carter, can you give us a statement about the incident on the flight?" one reporter shouted. Marcus held up a hand, his voice firm. "I have no comment at this time. My daughter has been through a traumatic experience, and I intend to protect her privacy. We will be issuing a statement through the appropriate channels when the time is right." He guided Aaliyah toward the waiting car, shielding her from the flashing cameras and persistent questions. Once they were safely inside, Aaliyah let out a deep breath, her small shoulders slumping with relief. "It's okay, sweetheart," Marcus soothed, wrapping an arm around her. "We're away from all that now. You're safe." Aaliyah nodded, leaning into her father's embrace. "I'm glad I have you, Daddy." Marcus pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And I'm glad I have you, Princess. We're going to get through this together." The car pulled away from the airport, leaving the commotion and chaos behind. As they neared one of Marcus's properties, Aaliyah's eyelids began to droop, the exhaustion of the day's events finally catching up with her. Marcus watched her fondly, his heart swelling with a mix of pride, protectiveness, and a renewed determination to ensure that nothing like this would ever happen to his daughter again. Once they arrived, Marcus carried the sleeping Aaliyah inside, carefully laying her down on the couch. He draped a soft blanket over her, brushing a stray curl from her face. Stepping back, he let out a long, shaky breath, the events of the day finally catching up with him. He knew that the coming days and weeks would be difficult, filled with interviews, investigations, and the inevitable media frenzy. But he was prepared to face it all, fueled by his unwavering love for his daughter and his determination to see justice served. As he made his way to the kitchen to prepare a light meal for Aaliyah, his mind raced with thoughts of the changes he would implement at his airline. The systemic issues that had allowed Marie's abuse to go unchecked would be thoroughly addressed, and he would personally ensure that every employee, from the highest executive to the newest hire, understood the importance of treating every passenger with dignity and respect. No child should ever have to endure what Aaliyah had gone through, and Marcus vowed to use his position and influence to drive the necessary reforms. This incident would become a catalyst for change, not just in his own company, but in the entire airline industry. Several hours later, Aaliyah stirred on the couch, the enticing aroma of her favorite homemade chicken noodle soup wafting through the air. Marcus was by her side in an instant, a gentle smile on his face. "Welcome back, Princess. How are you feeling?" Aaliyah blinked sleepily, her gaze meeting her father's. "Hungry," she replied, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Marcus chuckled, relief washing over him. "Then you're in luck. I've got a fresh batch of your favorite soup waiting for you." As Aaliyah ate, Marcus watched her closely, his heart swelling with pride at her resilience. She had been through so much, yet she still maintained the innocent wonder and optimism that he cherished in her. "Daddy," Aaliyah said suddenly, her voice soft. "Yes, sweetheart. Is Marie going to jail for a long time?" Marcus reached across the coffee table, gently squeezing her hand. "Yes, Princess. She's going to be held accountable for her actions. I promise you, she won't be able to hurt anyone else." Aaliyah nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Good. I don't want her to do that to any other kids." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for his daughter's compassionate heart. "Neither do I, Aaliyah. That's why I'm going to make sure changes happen, so that nothing like this ever happens again. Not just on our airline, but everywhere." Aaliyah smiled, her eyes shining with trust. "I know you will, Daddy. You always make things right." Marcus pulled her into a warm embrace, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "I will always protect you, Aaliyah. Always." In the weeks following the harrowing incident on the flight, Marcus Carter worked tirelessly to enact meaningful change within his airline and the industry at large. His singular focus was ensuring that no child would ever have to endure what his beloved Aaliyah had suffered. Behind the scenes, Marcus collaborated with aviation authorities, industry leaders, and lawmakers to overhaul hiring practices, training protocols, and passenger safety policies. He was acutely aware that this was not just about punishing one cruel individual, but addressing systemic failures that had allowed such abusive behavior to occur. The legal proceedings against Marie Delacroix continued to unfold, with the disgraced flight attendant facing a slew of charges, including assault of a minor, child endangerment, and abuse of position. Marcus attended every court hearing, his presence a silent but unwavering testament to his commitment to seeing justice served. As the case progressed, more disturbing details emerged about Marie's history. It became clear that her toxic behavior was not isolated to the incident involving Aaliyah, but rather a pattern of mistreatment and discrimination that had gone unchecked for years. Witnesses from her previous employers came forward, describing a trail of complaints and disciplinary actions that had somehow been swept under the rug. Marcus was outraged but not surprised. He knew that the airline industry, like many others, had long been plagued by a culture of complacency and a reluctance to hold abusers accountable. This was precisely the mindset he was determined to change. The time for looking the other way is over, Marcus declared in a statement to the press. We have a moral and ethical responsibility to ensure the safety and dignity of every single passenger who entrusts us with their travel. Anything less is a betrayal of the public's trust. His words resonated, igniting a much-needed conversation about the need for sweeping reforms. Passengers, employees, and industry stakeholders rallied behind Marcus, recognizing the gravity of the situation and the importance of the changes he was championing. As the legal proceedings continued, Aaliyah slowly began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The bruises on her arm faded, and the haunted look in her eyes gave way to the carefree sparkle that her father adored. With the support of her loving family and a trusted therapist, she worked through the trauma, learning to trust again and reclaim her sense of safety. Marcus made sure that Aaliyah knew she was loved, protected, and that he would always be there to shield her from harm. He spent countless hours listening to her fears and concerns, validating her feelings, and reassuring her that she had done nothing wrong. "You are the bravest, strongest girl I know," Marcus would tell her, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you, and I will never let anyone hurt you again." Aaliyah would nod, her small hand gripping her father's tightly. "I know, Daddy. I know you'll always protect me." As the months passed, Marcus's efforts to reform the industry began to bear fruit. New hiring practices were implemented, requiring extensive background checks and psychological evaluations for all flight crew. Training programs were overhauled, with a renewed focus on customer service, conflict de-escalation, and recognizing and reporting abusive behavior. Most significantly, Marcus spearheaded the creation of a comprehensive passenger bill of rights, which outlined clear guidelines for how airlines were to treat their customers, with strict consequences for any violations. The document was adopted by several major carriers, and Marcus vowed to continue pushing for its universal implementation across the industry. "This is about more than just the bottom line," Marcus said in a speech before a gathering of industry leaders. "It's about upholding the values of dignity, respect, and compassion that should be the foundation of air travel. We owe it to our passengers, and we owe it to ourselves, to be the standard bearers of excellence." The changes Marcus instituted at his own airline were immediate and impactful. Passenger satisfaction ratings soared, and employee morale reached new heights as they embraced the renewed focus on safety and customer care. Word quickly spread, and other carriers began to take notice, recognizing the need to follow suit or risk falling behind. As the legal case against Marie Delacroix neared its conclusion, Marcus made sure to keep Aaliyah informed of the proceedings, without overwhelming her with the gritty details. He wanted her to understand that the woman who had hurt her was being held accountable, and that justice was being served. The day of the sentencing hearing arrived, and Marcus made the decision to attend with Aaliyah. He wanted her to see that the system could work, that her voice and her experience mattered. As they entered the courtroom, Aaliyah's grip on her father's hand tightened, but her expression was resolute. The judge listened intently as the prosecution laid out the case, detailing the abuse Aaliyah had suffered and the long-term emotional and psychological harm it could cause. Marie sat hunched in her chair, her face a mask of barely concealed panic. When it was time for the judge to deliver the sentence, the courtroom fell silent. Marie Delacroix, the judge began, her voice stern. Your actions on that flight were a betrayal of the trust placed in you as a caretaker and a representative of the airline industry. Your abuse of a child in your care is abhorrent and unforgivable. The judge paused, her gaze sweeping the courtroom. This court sentences you to 5 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. Additionally, you are hereby barred from ever working in the airline industry again. Your actions have demonstrated that you are unfit to hold a position of trust and responsibility. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, and Marcus felt Aaliyah's hand relax slightly in his own. He squeezed her fingers reassuringly, pride swelling in his chest at her resilience. As they left the courthouse, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. The legal battle had been arduous, but seeing justice served brought him a measure of closure. Now he could focus his energy on the next phase of his mission, ensuring that the changes he had implemented at his airline would become the new standard across the industry. In the weeks that followed, Marcus worked tirelessly, meeting with aviation authorities, lawmakers, and industry leaders to push for the adoption of the Passenger Bill of Rights he had championed. His unwavering determination and the compelling evidence of the tangible benefits his own airline had experienced made it increasingly difficult for others to resist. One by one, the major carriers began to fall in line, recognizing the importance of prioritizing passenger safety and dignity. The public, too, rallied behind Marcus's efforts, flooding social media with messages of support and appreciation for his bold stance. As the changes took hold, Marcus began to receive invitations to speak at industry conferences and events, sharing his insights and inspiring others to follow in his footsteps. He used these platforms to amplify the voices of passengers who had experienced mistreatment, underscoring the urgent need for a cultural shift within the industry. We are not just selling tickets, Marcus would often say. We are entrusted with the lives and well-being of our passengers. That is a responsibility we must take seriously, no matter their class, their background, or their age. Aaliyah, now 8 years old, watched with a sense of quiet pride as her father's influence and impact grew. She still bore the emotional scars of her own traumatic experience, but the haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a newfound resilience and confidence. I'm so proud of you, Daddy, she said one evening as they sat together, watching the sunset. You're making the world a better, safer place. Marcus pulled her into a warm embrace, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. And you, my brave girl, are the inspiration for it all. I will never stop fighting to protect you and every other child who trusts us with their travel. Aaliyah snuggled closer, a contented sigh escaping her lips. I know, Daddy. I know. In the months that followed, Marcus's efforts continued to bear fruit. The Passenger Bill of Rights he had championed was now widely adopted, and the industry began to see a marked improvement in customer satisfaction and overall safety standards. The changes were not just superficial. They went to the core of the industry's culture, challenging long-held assumptions and empowering employees to speak up against abusive behavior. Marcus made sure that every member of his airline staff, from the ground crew to the pilots, understood the importance of their role in upholding the principles of dignity and respect. As word of the transformative changes spread, Marcus began to receive accolades and recognition from various organizations and media outlets. He accepted these honors not for his own sake, but as an opportunity to amplify the voices of those who had suffered at the hands of the industry's failings. This is not about me, he would say. This is about ensuring that no child, no passenger, ever has to endure what my daughter went through. That is the legacy I want to leave behind. Aaliyah, now a thriving and confident young girl, watched her father's impact with a sense of awe and gratitude. She knew that her own experience had been the catalyst for this profound change, and she felt a deep responsibility to use her voice to continue championing the cause. One day, as Marcus was preparing to address a gathering of industry leaders, Aaliyah approached him, her eyes shining with determination. "Daddy, can I come with you?" she asked, her small hand reaching for his. "I want to tell them how important it is to keep everyone safe." Marcus felt his heart swell with pride. He knelt down, pulling his daughter into a tight embrace. "Of course, Princess. I would be honored to have you by my side." And so, together, father and daughter took the stage, their voices united in a powerful call for change. A change that would reverberate through the industry, transforming the way airlines cared for and protected their most precious cargo, the passengers who entrusted them with their journeys. In the years that followed, Marcus's legacy continued to grow as the reforms he had championed became the new industry standard. Aaliyah, now a thriving young woman, followed in her father's footsteps, using her own experiences and voice to champion the cause of passengers' safety and dignity. The scars of her traumatic ordeal had long since healed, but the lessons she had learned about the power of resilience, the importance of speaking up, and the transformative impact of love and justice would shape the rest of her life. She knew that her father's fight had been her own, and she was more than ready to carry on that legacy, ensuring that no one would ever have to endure what she had suffered. As Marcus Carter looked out at the bustling airport terminal, watching the planes take flight, he couldn't help but feel a sense of profound gratitude and purpose. The journey had been long and arduous, but the changes he had set in motion were now firmly entrenched, safeguarding the well-being of countless passengers for generations to come. With Aaliyah by his side, Marcus knew that the work was far from over. But as he gazed into his daughter's eyes, he saw the same unwavering determination that had driven him all along. Together, they would continue to be the champions of change, ensuring that the skies remained a place of safety, dignity, and respect for all who dared to take flight. This story was a reminder that no matter who you are or how much power you hold, protecting those you love is what truly matters. Justice was served not because of his position, but because a father stood up for his daughter when she needed him the most. This story reminds us all of the importance of treating everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of their background. What would you have done if you were in Mr. Carter's shoes? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more powerful stories like this one. Thanks for watching.